All right, Nerdy Bones bonus episode. I'm here with Caymin. What's up, brother?
Hey, how's it going, Keith?
So this episode is a long time coming because, like I was telling you, like I was telling you on every single episode, I kind of figure out a way to bring in Bigfoot.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
and you're the motherfucker that is responsible for my obsession with Bigfoot because we were talking podcast one day.
Yep.
And you're like, check out Sasquatch Chronicles, and I was like, okay, cool, I'll check that out.
Yeah.
And now I've listened to every single freaking episode. So.
I can't say I've listened to every single one, but
Oh yeah, I've basically gone through all of them.
It's a great podcast.
Yeah. So without further ado, we're talking Bigfoot today. Duh.
We are.
So I wanted to talk to you about like maybe some of your encounters or things that you've experienced.
Yeah. I've got two that I can talk about that, I'm comfortable saying that I think what I encountered were Bigfoot on two different occasions. The first one,
because you hike a lot. You hike a lot.
Yeah. I get out into the woods quite a bit, and 99 times out of 100, nothing out there.
Yeah.
See birds and lizards, and that's about it. But there's certain times, if you get off trail a little bit, you start looking around, you're likely to find something.
Yeah.
And on one particular occasion, I don't know how many years ago this was, maybe 4 years ago, I was out with a buddy of mine, Michael. Shout out to Michael. And we were out on the backside of Mount Lemmon. I won't say exactly where.
So Mount Lemmon. Nice.
Yeah, very interesting encounter up there.
I think
encounter.
you told me about this.
This was weird. It was in February, I believe. There was a lot of snow. The area that we were walking around in was officially closed, but we just parked up at the top and kind of walked down in anyways. And there was tons of snow, and we were only there about an hour. But we walked about a mile down this hill, and we hung out there for about 10 minutes, and he was kind of doing some call blast type
Really?
stuff.
Was he? Really?
Yeah, just yelling off into the woods trying to attract.
You're freaking asking for it at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we were both doing it, actually. But anyways, after a while, we didn't hear anything.
No.
But right next to the road that we were on, something was peeking out from behind a tree. Definitely a human figure. It was like half of a head, a shoulder, and an arm. And it was kind of swaying back and forth from behind the tree.
You hear that a lot.
The sway.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
Yeah, the little tree peeking, swaying.
Mm-hmm.
Quite common.
About what time of day?
Dusk. It was like.
Well, that makes sense.
Like the sun had been down for probably half an hour, so it was like literally the last 5 minutes of the dimmest light possible. So
twilight.
It was just a silhouette. And we saw that, and we were walking back up the road, because that kind of freaked us out. We sat there and watched it for about a minute, and we're like, okay, it's time to go.
Yeah, it's time to go.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. You go out there looking to experience something, and once you do, you kind of want to get out of there.
It's like Wes Germer always says, like, what are you going to do when you actually find one?
Exactly.
What are you going to do when you actually find one?
Exactly. And, I don't know what that was. Maybe it was some asshole messing with us, but I doubt it. I doubt
especially
there was anybody.
Especially with the sway, and like the big thing you see like in large primates, they do that sway.
Yep.
It's kind of like I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like a sign of anxiety.
Yeah, Christopher Noel is a really awesome source for Sasquatch behavior. He's been studying behavior that's been happening on his property and around his property. He lives in Maine. And
in Maine, okay.
He wrote a book called The Sasquatch Savant Theory, and his
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, his theory is that maybe possibly these things have autistic traits.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
By default.
Yeah, just by default. I've actually heard about that. One that because some of the stuff that I've seen and listened to is like you see in their face that they almost have like I hate forgive me for saying this, but they almost have like a Down syndrome like face.
Yeah. A lot of people describe that, and a lot of the behaviors that are described, I mean, that lines up exactly. I think he's onto something.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be an ass. I'm not trying to be uncouth, but like that's one of the things a lot of people say is like maybe their breeding pool is so small that they're inbred.
Could be.
That's one theory that I've actually recently seen.
Yeah, and well, anyways, with this particular encounter, this was just a beginning, and. And we were walking up the road I just said a road. I basically gave away the location, but we were walking up.
Kind of want to avoid that.
Yeah, we were walking up the road, and the whole way back up, it sounded like something was paralleling the road with us.
So it was escorting you out, basically.
Something like that.
Yeah.
You know, we could hear something walking. It wasn't doing anything particularly intimidating, but we could hear something walking. I don't know if there was more than one in that case. I really don't. There probably was. There almost always is. So we get almost to the top of the road, maybe 10, 15 minutes after we see this little tree peaker. And
tree peaker. I like that.
And by the way, so I should describe this tree peaker was relatively short for what you would think a Sasquatch might be. I would estimate it's probably 6 foot because it was downhill a little bit, and it looked to be about the same height as me. I'm 5'7".
Okay.
And it was a little bit downhill, so I'm estimating it was maybe 6 feet. Hard to say for sure, especially 4 years ago. But anyways, we were walking back up the road, and I'm in front. My buddy Michael is maybe 20 feet behind me, and I hear, so this is my version of what I remember. I hear crashing, like tree branches snapping and stuff, and then something hit the ground. I turn around, and there's right after I heard something hit the ground, I turn around and I see another rock land, and I'm talking probably double the size of a basketball.
Shit.
Land directly at Michael's feet. Directly at Michael's feet.
And you see that a lot, that they don't actually try to hit people. It's more of like, hey, fuck off.
Yeah. Very much because like a warning.
Because with that kind of aim and that type of rock,
it would have been done.
Yeah, one and done.
It scared the hell out of both of us. And he actually saw, I'm not sure that he saw both, but he definitely saw at least one of these rocks, and he was like, that thing was a dart coming through. It wasn't like it just, there was a couple of rocks that rolled downhill or anything. It was snapping tree branches
on its way down. That's fucking scary, dude.
And yeah, and it was basically at a point where the road sort of switchbacks, and so it came from where the road was on top of us. So you're on the bottom part of the road, and then it kind of curves around and comes back up. Yeah. It came from that upper area, so it came from uphill. And yeah, man, there's just 2 big rocks laying at his feet. I mean, both of them were in the exact same spot essentially. And basically that was the end of that encounter. I think we ran the rest of the way to the car.
I would too, man. I would too. Well, and like, if there's any place in Tucson, Arizona, I always call it parts unknown, but if there's any place in Tucson, Arizona that could be a habitat, would be Mount Lemmon.
That'd be the only place. And even though I've had that experience, and even though I saw like a straight up half of a human figure, it was a silhouette. I'm somewhat skeptical because I think the water sources up there are limited, but they're available. Exactly. If you know where to be.
Well, there's bears up there.
Yeah, there's definitely bears up there.
There's more than enough resources to sustain a large creature.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
I think if they're up there, there's probably not more than a family group or 2.
Right. They just made it there and stopped.
Something. Yeah, I'm not sure. And maybe they travel between there and the Pinolinos, which is Mount Graham. There's a lot of credible Mount Graham sightings. The thing about
I did not know that.
The thing about Mount Lemmon is you only find, at least on the BFRO website, which is like the only source of like, this is the only large database that I know of sightings, and there's only one from Pima County.
Really?
And it's from the 1970s. And
is that the one in Sabino Canyon? Yes, I was going to cite that. Yes, I was going to actually, in preparation for today's episode, I actually watched that guy's interview.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
He's basically talking about that he was out hiking and saw this large hairy creature crouched down by a tree.
Yep.
And then like stood up and looked at him and walked away.
I think he said it was holding a stick in its hand, and it looked like it was sticking a stick into an anthill or something.
Just like chimpanzees do, exactly using a tool.
Yeah,
using a tool.
I haven't read that account in a while, but that's what I remember of it, and it's on the BFRO website.
That's crazy.
I love that website. You can go there and click on any state you want, and then go county by county.
And that's the only one in Pima County.
That's the only one in Pima County.
Well, and that kind of makes sense simply because of our topography.
Yeah.
It would be kind of not conducive to sustain
a large population or
a 1,000-pound creature.
Yeah.
that needs to probably eat God knows how much.
Yeah. I'm conflicted about whether they're up there or not. You know, I go back and forth in my mind, and then whenever I see something up there, you know, I've seen plenty of tree structures up there, especially in the remote areas.
Tell me about that. I want to hear about that.
So the last there was nothing that happened.
Last time we saw a tree structure?
Yeah, the last ones I saw were, I don't want to give away the location because if they
you don't want a bunch of people flooding up there.
Yeah, if they are up there, I don't want to disturb them, you know, and this is one of the most remote locations
typically
on the mountain.
Typically that would put people in danger, honestly.
It would put people in danger, and I would, if they're up there, I just don't want to scare them out of one of the only remote locations up there. So that too. So, you know, I was in this location, and hardly anybody's hiking up there. There is a trail right through the area, and yeah, tons of tree structures, man. There was a couple of those,
like the TP structures.
There was a couple of those, but it was mostly
structure. Sorry,
it was mostly arches.
Okay.
Which a lot of people, they would attribute that to snowfall. So snowfall sometimes will create arches. Yeah, but that's similar.
Also, I know what you're talking about, like tree breaks and stuff like that. Like the big thing is like a lot of stuff is still green, and then like if you like, I saw what's the guy that Todd Standing.
Yeah,
like he was showing like actually like these branches like have it physically reach up and like try to break them, physically reach up and try to snap them and break them. That's gonna take a lot of force. There's no amount of snow that's gonna land on a fucking tree branch that's gonna break it like that.
Yeah, and you know even if you could make the argument that that's the case, this is in a location that receives little to no snowfall every year. I mean, Mount Lemmon barely gets any snow anyway.
Yeah,
and you go down this area is about 6,000 feet. There's not much snowfall there at all. And on top of that, it wasn't just the arches, but there was one particular structure that was kind of blocking the trail, and it was like made out of relatively large logs, I'd say 8 inches or so in diameter, and it was like an asterisk.
Oh, okay.
And it blocked the entire trail.
That's crazy.
And it was parallel with the ground. It wasn't, up in the air, but there was some structures up in the air too. Like there was giant X's everywhere.
That's fucking wild, dude.
And it's the only place on Mount Lemmon that I've seen structures in that density. There are other places that I've seen them and they look older, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense.
And those are in some quite populated areas now.
Well, and like
popular hiking areas at least.
Like I said, kind of at the top of the show, like you've done a lot of hiking.
I try to.
You've been out. You've been out in a lot of areas. So like I kind of take what you say at like this is what happened.
And and there's there's so many different reasons. People speculate. There could be at least 10 different reasons why they make these tree structures. Maybe it's marking their territory.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a visual marker for themselves. Maybe it's the Sasquatch savant theory and they just like doing it for some reason.
It's just a compulsion.
Maybe it's, like hunters would make a blind. Maybe it helps them a little bit stay concealed in some cases. We don't really, obviously nobody knows. Like Wes says,
we don't have one in your garage.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, like one of the things that pops out in my mind on this subject is you talk about like tree breaks. And you actually, I remember listening to the Smoky Mountain incident. And like basically the tree breaks were actually directionalized in one, like basically like this is our area. Don't cross this.
It seems when you find them, if you go off trail and you follow them, it seems like they go in paths. So my hypothesis is that they use these as like pathway markers. It's a safe travel corridor for them with dense foliage.
It's like a highway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Again, hypothesis, but
we're no experts.
So speaking of tree structures, the other encounter that I had that was quite compelling was in Colorado in Boulder County. And
was this the one where you yelled back at it?
I didn't do anything to entice them.
I just remember you telling me a story one time where you were hiking and you heard something and you turned around and like yelled and tried to be big.
Oh, okay, yeah, they were.
I don't mean to derail.
Yeah, that's an interesting story because it happened in the exact same area where I was talking about all these tree structures in the Mount Lemmon area, around 6,000 feet. I was camping. I went up there to do a 2-night trip, and I got to the area. I forgot my fuel, so I couldn't cook food, which is fine, whatever. I was planning on coming back down in like a couple more hours, and I was kind of packing stuff up. But the whole time I was up there in this area, every time I'm up there alone, at least, even when I'm with people, it gives you that really uneasy feeling like you're being watched every single time I'm up in that area, without fail. every single time.
Shit, yeah.
You know, so you get that creepy being watched feeling, and you're just creeped out.
Skin crawling.
Yeah, and then there was really nothing happened that night except for a rock fell off the fire ring right behind me, and I think it just kind of happened.
Yeah.
You know, and it scared the living hell out of me, and I turned around and let out a roar.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there were some campers, there were some other hikers that were camped probably half a mile away. I know they heard it, and I hope I didn't scare the life out of them. And then I walked through their camp about half an hour after I was roaring.
Yeah.
You know, so I really hope I didn't scare those fellas.
Well, I didn't mean to derail your story. And,
no.
Continue with that.
Yeah, so in Colorado, Boulder County, I was out hiking. I had just discovered Utah Sasquatch's YouTube channel. He has since deactivated his YouTube channel. He had a lot of crazy stalker weird stuff going on, and you know, he come out and you start talking about Bigfoot. Yeah. Sometimes weird stuff happens.
Well, I just listened to his Sasquatch Chronicles episode yesterday.
Oh, did you? It's good.
Yeah,
it's really good. Yeah, he's a very smart guy, man.
Yeah, the whole thing is he was like trying to convince his nephew that it was fake.
Yeah, exactly. That's how he kind of got into the subject.
Yeah.
And then he
well, dude, you're directly responsible for putting me down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, and so he has a really great YouTube, or he had a really great YouTube video where he was on Google Earth for about an hour explaining where to find these things, basically. He wasn't giving exact locations, but he was just giving you an idea of, you know, find the water, find a north-facing hill, travel the military crest, which is just below the top of the hill. He described these things moving around, at least in the area that he was in, much like special forces would move around in a mountain environment.
They would make sense because they would be the masters of their environment.
Exactly.
Would I be out of line to say that they would be like the apex predator in the area?
I would assume so, man.
In any area that they would be in.
I would assume so. I mean, they might compete with grizzly bears up north. Maybe.
Dude, think about the strength. Think about the strength that's been displayed. Stuff like that. Like they could probably pick a grizzly bear up over their head.
Yeah, I would assume some of the bigger ones probably could.
Like, I read an account of one that was 12 feet tall. This guy estimated 12 feet.
Yeah.
Imagine a 12 feet tall primate.
I have a 12-foot tall cactus in my yard, and I just imagine something that's 4 foot less than that, and it's mind-boggling when you're really looking at something that is that tall, and you're thinking about, okay, well, what if this thing was 4 feet wide? Goodness gracious.
Yeah, exactly. Goodness gracious. Well, like that's the big thing I keep hearing, like when I listen to accounts, is just like the sheer size.
Yes.
Just like that's what.
Yep.
Again, I derailed your story, dude. I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine. This is what this is all about. So, yeah, I was using Utah Sasquatch's method to try to find Bigfoot structures, Bigfoot sign anywhere in the Rocky Mountains. I was there hiking around on and off for about 5 weeks. And yeah, in this one particular area, I was just hiking down a trail, doing a regular old day hike, and I saw a tree break right on the side of the trail, and it was right where a canyon crosses the trail. And I decided to go up that canyon a little bit behind the tree break to see if I could find any more sign. Sure enough, found all kinds of different tree structures, from arches to X's to breaks, you name it. I mean, it was there.
Well, and not to jump in again, but like for somebody to like quote unquote like hoax that, they would have to really go out of the way to do that shit.
Yeah, because it's almost everywhere, you know. And skeptics, rightfully so, would claim, you know, it's from snow load.
I don't buy the snow load thing. I just don't.
I do in certain situations, but I mean, when you're only finding these in certain paths and stuff, it's, you know, if you're finding a direct line of these things and you go, say, 30 yards to the left and they're not there, or 30 yards to the right, they're not there.
Yeah, not consistent.
Exactly. So, you know, I find this essentially a line of tree structures going up this canyon. I followed them for quite a while. I came across a very large footprint that I didn't measure it, but it was about 18 inches long.
What?
And
what? Cayman, you found a footprint?
One footprint.
Oh, fuck.
Well, I had been following what I thought, based on some of Utah Sasquatch's videos, like everything I was doing was kind of following his method up there. And, you know, I was following a trackway of a large animal that I was like, I don't know what this animal is. Maybe it's a bear. But I was following its trackway. And that's when I found that footprint. And I was like, okay, this is the trackway of something very large with a very large bipedal animal, I would assume.
Well, like I didn't quite write this down for topics to go on to. Well, I did, but I kind of want to hop into this as the types, like because like Germer kind of has the theory of 4 types, at least in the United States, because you think about like where was it Colorado, the Patterson-Gimlin footage?
No, that was in the Sierra Nevada and central. I think it was actually northern eastern California, kind of.
But then, because like say let's just say Patty. Let's just say Patty is one type. Big barrel chest, non-confrontational. And then when you go like more towards like I wrote it down, the one in the sightings in Canada are a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, they can be.
Yeah,
location by location, it seems like Southeast Texas is particularly aggressive. But yeah, to continue that Colorado encounter, after I found that footprint, I continued up that canyon a little ways, and I found another really awesome tree structure. It was a really cool teepee looking thing, and nothing really happened for a while. I was coming back down, and once I was almost back to the trail, I heard, I'm trying to remember exactly what happened first. I believe the tree knock was the first thing I heard, and that was from quite a distance away from up the canyon where I'd come back from. And then I heard something right behind a bush that was 15 yards away from me at most, and something big was right behind that bush. And then I heard a whoop from another location.
That shit's scary, dude.
That was that was probably 20 yards away. The knocking was probably coming from 50 to 75 yards away, and it sounded like there was 3 of them kind of in a triangle around me. And then the one behind the big bush started whooping as well. So I had 2 whoopers and 1 knocker all right around me. And I sat there for, 20 minutes listening to this.
Did you ever feel like threatened?
Not particularly. No, not at all, really. It was very interesting. It was kind of a little bit hair-raising, but at the same time, there wasn't any aggressive behavior. They weren't throwing things at me or anything. And I sat there for probably 20 minutes listening to this on and off, and I'd hear a sound at least every minute or two. And for a good 5 to 10 minutes there, it was quite constant. And it was interesting. It was very interesting, to say the least. After it quieted down, I didn't hear anything for 10 minutes. I stood in that same spot and just listened. I just stood there. It just didn't move.
Well, the fact that you're a distance hiker like that.
Yeah.
Like I heard something the other day is like the more time you spend out in the woods, like
Yep.
It's just the probability goes higher.
Exactly.
Like the more time that you're out there.
Especially if you go into a place looking for something and you know what to look for.
Right.
Like I was, and I wasn't particularly looking for anything in that situation. I just happened to find something and pursued it. And definitely got something interesting out of that. Those are, as far as my encounters go, that's really about it that I can say is really compelling. I've had some other interesting incidences that I can't really chalk up to anything.
Yeah.
It's, but I've seen tree structures in a lot of different places.
Well,
a lot of different places.
On that note, let's just move into evidence.
Yeah.
Like one of the things I mentioned to you earlier, they've convicted people for murder with less evidence.
They sure have, yeah.
So you look at okay, so one of the things you brought up was around this area. Of course, the topography wouldn't really be conducive to having something like that around here.
They'd have to be really isolated up on our quote unquote Sky Islands.
Sky Island, yeah. But the soil and dirt around here wouldn't be enough wouldn't be loose enough to impress unless you're up in a spot like that.
Yeah, you might be able to find trackways, but not definitive footprints. So
I like what you were saying, but we're actually joined by Tony now.
What's up, Tony?
Yeah.
What's going on, everybody?
Jump on in, brother.
Bigfoot Tony.
Now,
not the actual Bigfoot Tony.
Well, I do have big feet.
Nice.
But now, this is actually something that I find interesting about Bigfoot, and a lot of things that kind of get imposed on the mythological being or whatever you want to call it. I think he's real. But
I think all three of us think it's real.
Oh yeah.
But this is the thing, is that a lot of people have that conception that, or the idea, I should say, that Bigfoot or the Yeti or whatever you want to call it.
Sasquatch. I actually have a bunch of names written down. I found a bunch of different names.
Yeah,
one of the things I find most interesting is a lot of people believe that it's almost confined to isolation, that it prefers to stay isolated. Now, think about this.
I told you.
A being that has been able to avoid, for the most part, being publicly spotted for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Wouldn't you think it has the high enough intelligence not to just avoid people, but also to learn about people, and also to be able to get close enough to them in a populated area, mind you, and avoid detection?
Do you think Bigfoots have people conferences?
I think, it would not surprise me if they had their own if they had their own gatherings. I mean, you think about it.
That's kind of what I was getting.
Yeah.
I mean, Lord knows they have enough to bitch about when it comes to us,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Well,
I mean,
I'm digging what you're saying though, because like imagine a species that was alongside us this entire time, and we're like, fuck those guys. Those guys are fucking trouble.
Right.
Yeah, we're gonna learn how to not be seen. We're gonna learn how to go do this, and this be us.
It makes me wonder about sightings. If they're not kind of just revealing themselves, or if maybe they're just they got caught the one time in their life making a big mistake and they got sighted.
That's actually
what's happening.
That's
there?
actually a really interesting idea, because I kind of believe that you're not going to see them unless they want you to.
Yeah.
Well, also, I mean, but then again, you can also add in the laws of probability. I mean, if you run it by those numbers, it's an inevitability that they're going to be seen no matter how good you are, no matter hiding from the public. You're eventually going to be spotted.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just kind of a given, really.
You're going to walk down the street a certain amount of times, somebody's going to see you.
All right. Or, and just, here in Tucson, you walk down the street, it's only a matter of time before someone asks you for a cigarette.
There you go. Or some change. Or something like that.
Or like in my instance, passing by the liquor store right here, this guy, random dude, wanted to slap my hand. And I just walked right by him.
I know who you're talking about. He's a weirdo.
It's like, man,
he's a weirdo.
I have enough issues with human contact as it is. I mean, shit, I think I'd be right at home with the big people, the big fucking people.
Right. Well, and then like one of the things that Cayman and I kind of had an idea that we want to get into is there like differences in like behavior.
Oh yeah.
To where it's like aggressive, or actually he sent me a video today of this guy. Who was the guy? Was that Todd Standing?
Yeah, that was Todd Standing.
He basically, what was the story? He fell down a hill.
Yeah, he was out basically trying to study this family group that he's been studying for a while, and I don't remember exactly what happened, but one was actually like chasing him out of the area and kept hitting him. Yeah. And like slapping him down to the ground essentially as he was running out.
But they saved his life though.
Yeah, and one of the times that it slapped him down, he rolled down a hill, and
there was a lot of snow melt at the time.
There was a lot of snow melt, glacial melt, and there was a large stick that impaled his leg, he said, to the bone.
Yeah.
And he said
he showed the scar.
Yeah, and he said he was, bleeding out. He thought he was going to die. And eventually he was trying to cross this glacial melt creek, and he got most of the way across it or something, slipped on some ice, hit his head, and went down the creek. He was knocked unconscious, and the next thing he knows, he wakes up on a ridge line above the creek in the sun.
He said something about being drugged, too. Like, remember?
There was drag marks.
Yeah, drag marks.
Drag marks and footprints.
Yeah.
And there was some weird, like sap that had sealed his wound that was applied by something.
Somebody did it.
Yeah, exactly. Presumably this family of Bigfoot, one of them
was like, I'm not going to let this guy die.
Stitched him up, got him up onto a hill in the sun to where he wouldn't die of hypothermia.
Yeah.
And he said he went to a doctor 3 days later.
He said I couldn't have stitched that up any better than that.
Yeah, exactly. He said it was perfect.
And
he didn't even need stitches.
He even compared scars of like actually getting stitches as opposed to this, and it's like
there's barely a scar.
From what he said, if what he said happened, that means that they have an understanding of medicine.
Todd Standing, like everybody in the Bigfoot quote unquote community, is a very controversial figure.
It's just because he's unlikable. It's just because he's unlikable.
And I tend to believe him, though.
Yeah, I believe him too. It's just because he's unlikable.
Now think about this too. Now there could be two different views. Well, there could be multiple views, but the two that I see now I could see this, that people would believe that the Bigfoot did this to quote unquote help the individual. Now I think it's a little bit more deeper than that.
Oh, we don't want this guy to die here because it's going to bring a bunch more of them.
Exactly. Exactly. There's a large level of cognizance about the implications of what could happen if they leave him here to die, or
there's going to be a bunch of people looking for him.
Right now, and then think about this: what is the more probable cause for worry? Because if you let him die there, obviously people are going to come looking for him, and they'll disturb the whole area. Blah 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 blah. Now, the other thing that I think is kind of cool is that they want this. Now they probably have the understanding, also based off of their observations of us, is that okay, we stitch this guy up. He has no idea who did this. Who the hell is going to believe him, and who the hell is going to, let alone want to follow him out to where he regains consciousness, where we leave him?
Well, and that speaks
he was in a really remote area.
And that speaks to their intelligence,
right?
And like the intelligence thing is really kind of interesting to me. Because they're, like we were talking about earlier with tree structures and tree breaks and stuff like that, they show a cognitive ability to like make decisions, have a calculated way that they do things. They're not like a fucking grizzly bear that just fucking wanders down the road and just fucking attacks whatever's there.
It would appear.
Does that make sense? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it would appear that these things are nearly as smart and maybe in some ways smarter than us. You know, at least in terms of their ability to evade us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that pops to my mind. On an episode with him, I brought up the quantum Sasquatch theory. Can you dive into that a little bit?
I don't.
That's not one for me that I subscribe to.
I don't necessarily either.
I would actually buy into that.
Well, it would make a lot of sense for a lot of stuff.
It sure does, yeah. It would explain a lot.
Well, and we have to kind of explain what the quantum Sasquatch theory is. It's like more or less that they're multi-dimensional. That's why a lot of times like footprints will go for about 100 yards and then just stop.
My buddy Michael, who had that rock thrown at him, he's a big believer in that theory.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I kind of feel the same way that you do, Keith, because I don't really know. You know, it's
well. You know what? You know what I'm going to do right now? You know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to steal fucking Wes's line. What do you think they are?
What do I think they are? I think
I personally think they're a flesh and blood animal that's just not, that's been smart enough to.
They may be the missing link.
Yeah.
The missing link in our evolutionary tree. They seem to be very much like us in appearance and behavior in some ways, at least. It's really hard to say. I think, they're definitely an ape. We're an ape.
I think they're I think they're apes. What about you, Tony?
I personally think that they're really a little bit beyond. Well, I mean, because in my case, I always ask that question. Well, really, what are any of us? What is existence? I mean, I can really get out there with that.
Oh yeah,
but
I know that. Yeah,
I think a lot of people don't give enough credit to Bigfoot. I think a lot of people just perceive it as more or less an animal. Now, who's to say an animal can't display ridiculously high intelligence? Now,
exactly.
Look at a really well-trained German Shepherd.
I mean, you could really combine all the theories. Now, it could be the missing link. Now, upon being the missing link, that section in our evolutionary chain that does not that basically is missing. Who's to say during that evolutionary process where they fit in, the brain activity that they possess couldn't function at a higher level than what we do now? Yep. And what happened before, the way Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon man, all those ancestors of ours, how they mentally, how their brains function.
Certainly possible.
And which could then tie in the quantum theory, the interdimensional theory, I should say. Because if our brain functions at it's almost a fraction of what possibilities our brain.
I've heard it explained as megahertz.
Right now, if we're only using a percentage of our brain
think it's like 30% at the highest.
Well, I've
something along those lines. Yeah.
Well, I've also heard that we use 100% of our brain, but it's just fractionalized between what you're doing. Like, say if you're walking, your brain.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You're using this much. You're using that much to do these specific things.
But then also,
we're also not brain scientists.
Then you also have things. Well, then you have things like junk DNA that
like vestigial tail
physically has no function within our bodies. It's just there. It takes up space, and there's no explanation as to what it's supposed to do. It could be possible that Bigfoot is just not only that missing link, but also an evolutionary jump in the mental department. I mean, it could be possible. No one, you can't prove it, but you can also disprove it.
Exactly.
Either.
I think you could tie infrasound into this quantum Bigfoot theory because what if through infrasound it distorts our ability to see?
Well, like what we were talking about earlier,
or perceive at least.
Well, you make an awesome point because what we were talking about earlier, fucking lions use infrasound, gorillas use infrasound.
Gorillas are awesome.
Yeah, and how could we explain to somebody that's never heard of infrasound what it is? It's a sound wave that hits your body and disrupts your cognitive abilities even. Or
you essentially can't hear it physically, like you can't hear it through your ears kind of. So it's kind of hard to describe, but my understanding of it is you can't really hear it, but it's like a subconscious sound wave that will cause you to become very, very upset.
And sick for days.
Potentially, yeah. And just terrified, completely paralyzed with fear. I've felt that random paralyzing fear in that place that I was talking about with the
I'm glad you mentioned I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the big things out of like the last like 100 like accounts that I've listened to because I've literally listened to that many. And the thing is like people feel this dread. That if
for no reason,
like if a lion is like right in front of you, you're gonna feel a certain way. But if you're out in the woods by yourself and you don't see something, and then that washes over you,
it could be.
That's an evolutionary tick, I think.
And to be fair, that could be a mountain lion. You know, we know
exactly.
We know mountain lions do it, and you're just not seeing. You know, if a mountain lion's around,
but you feel it
projecting infrasound, and you don't see it, you're just gonna be overwhelmed with this like primal fear.
That's the perfect way to put it.
That flight or fight instinct is basically
what I find most interesting about it. What I find most interesting is like the physical effects of it. Like I said, like with people getting sick and having headaches, and
I think Wes Germer on Sasquatch Chronicles
he explained depression actually.
Yeah, keep shouting out to him because
fuck yeah, Wes Germer.
Yeah, but yeah,
hit us up, man.
He described being sick for days afterward. I can't say I've ever experienced infrasound per se, but I have been overwhelmed by like nearly paralyzing fear for no apparent reason in random places, and it's almost always when I'm alone. Well, I hike alone most of the time, and it's a very rare occurrence, and it usually happens at night if it happens. But so I can't say definitively one way or the other if I've experienced that, but I think.
Yeah,
it's obviously a very real thing. We know lions do it, gorillas do it, like you guys said.
What's Tony? What's your thought on a sound wave that could hit your body like that?
Oh, I totally believe in it.
Right?
Well,
right?
Especially for me because my big thing is sound. I mean, I like the ideology.
That's why I asked you.
Well, I don't really believe that physical is physical. I like the idea and the theory that, you break down a molecule down to the base core where it's called, the quark. And then within the quark is a resonant vibration of energy that is literally at that specific frequency and does not fluctuate. And then is joined by multitudes of the same frequency then to create what we perceive as a solid, which in theory is
Tony's blowing minds right now.
All it is
you just manipulate that.
It's just condensed sound.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is one of the
it's like
coolest,
sound going through water.
Yeah, and look at what water does if you put it on top of a speaker. Check that shit out.
Sand.
Yeah. Check that shit out.
Have you seen sand on top of a speaker?
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, but it's just too fucking awesome. And so of course I'll believe in the idea that something can project that onto a human being and literally alter its its state of being. I mean, even science has created things that that teeter on that level. Project HARP is a really good example of that.
Good call.
We're getting deep.
Yes, we is.
That's a little bit more on the darker side, but
Well, no, you even like things we can prove, right? Is those like what they use in riots, those big sound speakers. Now you can actually hear that. You can actually hear that sound, so it's a little different. But yeah, I mean, it cripples people.
You know, well, if
and it burns your skin too.
Not actually cripples people. You're not going to be handicapped, but
no, it brings you to your knees
essentially.
And I've actually seen cases of that burning your skin.
Really?
Well,
yes.
It's
wow.
like
It's like microwaves.
Well, it's
That's
like
crazy.
taking the brown note, you know, a little extra further. You know?
Right? Yeah, the brown note from South Park.
What is that? I just made everybody poop their pants. Where were we, guys? Where were we? Oh, sorry about that.
I love this tangent.
Poop.
No.
So go ahead, dude. Go ahead.
But I think for the I really do believe that any type of aggression, a Sasquatch.
I'm glad you mentioned this because this is what I want to get into next is behavior.
I think it's really not for the sake of aggressiveness as in and of itself. I think it's literally a preventative measure.
Yeah,
I really think
I would agree in most cases.
that.
Do you think it'd be personality based, just like some people are dicks and some people aren't?
I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I would believe that. I would definitely buy into that.
Todd's I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's cool, man. What I think it is, I really do believe that they
went so left field.
I just really think that they just don't want to have anything to do with us.
I think it's because they've seen us as tearing them apart for years.
We tear apart their habitat. We log. I mean, look at what in places like Oregon, where you have just like basically log whatever you want. I don't know exactly how that works. I know it used to be the case where logging companies could just go in and just do these giant clear cuts. You'd have entire swaths of forest, acres and acres and acres just gone in the matter of a couple weeks.
Well, now they actually have stricter regulations, especially when it comes to old growth.
Yeah,
they do a lot
Thankfully.
more surveying. Yeah, and I think that is a really great thing. I mean, you don't want to take down trees that have been there for hundreds of years, and especially with in the case of a Sasquatch, maybe there is a relevance to where a lot of old growth is to where they may have themselves have originated from. I mean, they're more than capable of emotion. Who's to say they don't have sentimentality involved with that? I mean, they could have really gone way beyond us in the mental department, and physically they are just perfectly adapted to their environments. I mean, I think that's an evolutionary peak, really.
Yeah.
And
you know, Utah Sasquatch, who Nathan Rio, the guy whose formula I followed in Colorado to try to find evidence of Sasquatch, his whole thing is, you know, go to the north side of a hill because the north side of a hill is going to have the densest growth. It's going to provide the most cover and concealment. You know, you're going to be able to hide much easier on the north side of the hill than you would be on the south side of the hill. So yeah, the more growth, the older the growth, the better. I mean, I would think the old growth forests are going to be really dense. You're going to be able to hide. You're going to be able to be 10 feet away from somebody or something, and it's never going to know you're there.
Well, you make me think of I want to blend this topic into the next topic that I have, hot spots.
Yeah.
Like just on piggybacking on what you were saying.
Yeah.
Is like our area here wouldn't be able to support it.
Not
but
necessarily.
But you look into places like
just go a couple hours up north to the Mogollon Rim or the White Mountains.
there you go.
That you've got a lot of really credible sightings there. There's a place that I really want to go in the White Mountains. I won't give away that location because it sounds like the people who know about it want to keep it hush hush.
Yeah, the big thing
Makes
between
sense.
him and I on this episode is we're not like trying to give locations because we don't want people to
Flock.
Flock and disturb them.
Yeah.
Now, here's another thing that I actually kind of find sometimes I find it a little too convenient. When it comes to a lot of sightings that I hear about, at least, I mean, it's not really my strong suit, but I do like to delve into it every so often, is that a lot of locations, at least in a generalized area, have a tie-in one way or another to extraterrestrial sightings
I've
and
seen
activity.
a lot of that.
Now, here is kind of what I think. This is my own personal spin on this, and now this kind of rolls back into a little bit into the multidimensional being. Is that who's to say that at one point? Now, this also ties in with the evolutionary aspect. Now, when they evolved, they came about. Who's to say that because of their levels of intelligence, understanding, and just capabilities and potential, extraterrestrials then visited them rather than having to wait for us.
Tony's good at blowing my mind.
Because think about this. They could have been perceived as the one point where they could have actually made contact and not been in fear of what human beings now are capable of, which is mass destruction revolved around fear.
Yep.
Now, obviously, a Sasquatch will have a great deal of apprehension dealing with a being like this, but they would be able to then communicate, and possibly even on a telepathic level, which would then be able to calm a being like a Sasquatch down, and then to teach it, basically, this is what is about to happen to your species. We're going to teach you how to basically blink in and out of this at your own will, at your own desire, you know?
There's a lot of people that claim to have abilities like telepathy and things like that, and I'm not one to sit here and deny that ability. You know, I haven't experienced anything too direct with that myself, but you know, it's those type of moments where, you know, say you're going to call a friend that you haven't talked to in a year, and all of a sudden you're dialing their number and they call you.
Yeah,
things like that have happened. You know, for sure. Like you've had those moments in your life. I think we all have, where it's like, what happened there? Is it something that we just don't understand, that we're not able to directly tap into and do intentionally, just because we are so skeptical about it, or we haven't explored it, we can't even
or have we been taught to not acknowledge that anymore?
I think on that level. But check this out, I got the perfect example of that. Before I called you, or before I sent you the text, Keith, I went to the store. Just to get my, protein bar and my energy drink, like I always do. Now, as I was walking to the checkout line, there was a display for beef jerky.
Oh no!
And what did I see on what did I see on the top of that beef jerky display?
Sasquatch.
Exactly.
And you're like, "What are you doing, dude?"
No, well, the thing was, I didn't even think about it. I just saw it, and I was like, it made me think of Harry and the Hendersons and all the other Sasquatch stuff. And then I was just curious because it was early in the day for me, and I figured, well, I haven't seen you in a while, so I'd give you a call. And then you told me that you were doing a Bigfoot segment.
Exactly. And I was telling I was sitting here with Caymin when he texted me, like,
that's awesome.
And I was like, let's wait for a second because we need to have him here. We need to have, so we recorded a little bit, and then you got here. I was like, hell yeah.
Nice, yeah. It's incidents like that, and you could. I could list probably 10 different incidents in my life, mostly where I'm going to call somebody and they start calling me, and it's like, oh, I haven't talked to this person in a month or 6 months or whatever the time frame is, and it's like, how did that happen?
Well, you make
there's something unexplainable going on there.
You hit on something there, because like the other night I was like really sitting here and I was like, I really want to do like a full Bigfoot episode.
Yeah. And
then you messaged me. And I was like, this is the motherfucker that got me obsessed with Bigfoot.
Nice.
I'm going to ask him if he wants to do it. And you're like, hell yeah.
Nice.
So here we are right now.
Yeah.
We might be looking too deep into things.
No, but the thing is, we do this all the time. I mean, literally all the time. It's just we get so focused in on certain things that go on throughout our day that we never notice it. But I guarantee you, if you just kind of take a look at something that might catch your eye, I guarantee you run into it within 24 to 48 hours. I'm not saying that you're going to win the fucking lottery or anything like that using the same mindset, but I mean, you'll notice how many things run in sync with each other throughout the course of our lives.
Yep.
And it's just, and I think that kind of ties in with Bigfoot sightings too.
It could explain the entire quantum Bigfoot theory.
Exactly.
Things like that. Yeah.
Or think about the mindset of some of these people when they initially go out there. I mean, I think it's interesting that there has been Bigfoot sightings to where they just go out. Individuals will go out to either clear their minds, or there'll be something that's going on in their lives.
You're making a good point.
To where they need to be separated. Now, that in and of itself causes a human being to produce a specific type of vibration, much like the sound theory, the infrasound we were just talking about. Now, a high level being like a Bigfoot could easily pick up on that. Now, that could either agitate them, that could cause them to maybe be reactionary, to kind of give them a jolt that there's something more out there that they don't see, and don't sweat the small shit that's bugging them at that moment in time. And it could be big to them, but to a Sasquatch or a higher level of intelligence, that could be completely facetious.
Well, and that could probably prompt the different reactions people get.
Exactly.
And you could even think about, like when somebody walks into a room. Have you ever been in a store or something and somebody walks in and you just get a nasty feeling about
all
this
the
fellow?
time, all the time.
It's the same type of thing where it's like there's nothing particular about this guy. It's not necessarily the way he looks. It's just you're giving off a nasty vibe, dude, and you don't want to.
Yep, indeed.
yeah, so it's that kind of ties into that same thing, and it makes total sense. And you know, it's one of those things where it's like you can't touch it, so I'm hesitant to say for sure. You know, that's at least my point of view, but I think it's totally possible.
You know,
anything's possible.
I always equated like the Bigfoot to almost like the Lorax, you know, out of Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
You think about it. I mean, they're protecting the trees, or they're at least their natural habitat, which I think is awesome. So many people growing up, especially, almost vilified the Bigfoot, like, oh, it's just a being. You go out there, it'll kill you. I find that to be total BS.
And it could be possible. You know, there's definitely, I think, some credible stories of really nasty, aggressive Bigfoot behavior. And then there's other stories where it's like, you know, like the Todd Standing story that I shared with Keith this morning, where it sounds like sometimes they're trying to help us, or at least maybe it's not even that they're trying to help us. They're just trying to preserve themselves in doing that, you know, and maybe they've learned, oh, we kill one of these things and Jesus Christ, what happens after that? We all die. Or, you know, our home is flooded and we have to find a new one.
Well, they probably have had instances to where, like, maybe one of them killed somebody.
Yeah.
And then they had a huge influx of people looking for him.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was describing. And it's, you know, there's so many different possibilities. And I'm kind of fond of the idea that, you know, they're, in a lot of ways, they're like people that you're going to vary in personality. And Todd Standing said something in that exact same video about how, you know, he was doing research in an area in Montana for a couple of years, and all of a sudden it seemed like another male took over the group, a new alpha took over. So, and then all of a sudden all the interaction ceased. They were very much more reluctant to show themselves, make any kind of noise around them, and everything changed. And he said, from what he's noticed over the last couple of decades, is that tends to happen every 10 years or so with these family groups, is a new alpha will take over, and interaction may or may not change based on that. You know, their views on people as a family may change based on that.
Well, that makes me kind of think of I wanted to bring this up, the Siege of Hunabi. Really, really interesting stuff about like the way they interact with people and stuff like that. I forget where Hunabi's at. But these two brothers own a house. Well, I think only one of them lives there anymore. But more or less, these people were just live. Is it northern Canada?
This is a story I'm not entirely familiar with.
I could be 100% wrong where it's at.
It's one I have heard, but I haven't. I think I heard the story one time.
Yeah, but more or less, these guys were living. I can't say it was Canada. I might have that wrong. But they're in a very remote area with their two brothers with both of their families in one plot. They started having activity, and it like started getting out of control to the point where they were like knocking on the house, throwing rocks at the house,
scaring their kids,
looking in the windows, and they actually put up motion sensor lights because they heard like, hey, maybe this is something I can do to keep them back.
It's probably one of the best things I would think you could do if you got them on your property.
But what these specific creatures actually did was lay out sticks to this
border it off.
Yep. And, you know, like he would go out every morning and like see these sticks and then pick them up. And then it got to the point to where he went outside one morning and all of his motion sensor cameras were pushed up facing the sky.
I heard this story.
Wow. So these things knew what was causing these lights to go on.
Oh yeah.
So as
that's a high level of intelligence.
Yeah, and as this kind of progressed, they started getting closer to the house. They went out inside and saw two of them, and because they were like banging on the house. And he actually explained that one of them, he basically heard something, and he had like a dumpster on the side of his house. And he went out to check it out, and there was this huge hole in the side of it that wasn't there before.
Wow.
And he walks up to it to like check on it, and this creature pops up and fucking takes off at a speed that's just you couldn't get a beat on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so shit got real aggressive to where one of the brothers actually shot one.
Ugh.
And he actually watched.
Probably the worst thing you could do.
Yes, exactly. He sat there and watched it die, and several others picked him up and carried him off. And then after that, everything fucking went ape shit. Like they were there like every night, fucking trying to get in the house, trying to. One of the things that I thought was most interesting is like they'd go out there and like cause trouble to where one of the brothers would go outside with a gun, and like back off, and what they would do is like back up and try to draw him further out.
Oh,
and then there was actually a point to where he noticed that they were surrounding him.
Oh, yeah.
It was a fucking trap.
Yeah.
So these things set traps.
They're tacticians. You know, they are tactitioners. That experience I had in Colorado, I was basically triangulated, and I don't.
Dude, that's fucking scary. Dude.
To me, it wasn't scary. You know, they weren't displaying aggressive behavior,
but they wanted to keep tabs on you.
That's kind of the impression I got.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I always, whether it exists or not, I always had the idea in my head, and it was taught to me at a very early age, is no matter where you go, if you go into the wilderness, don't go in looking to start shit. And don't go in.
That's a great way to put it, dude.
And don't go in with basically an aggressive tone. I mean, it's one thing if you're going in there to unwind. If you're actually going in there to, get yourself centered, that they'll pick up on that and they'll leave your ass alone for the most part without giving you an aggressive feeling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you go in there because you're pissed and you want to retain that and you're looking to cause some trouble, even
when you're like a drunk redneck and you got to go do something stupid,
or it's in any instance, regardless, if you're going in there with ill intent, they will fuck with you and they will get your ass. They will want your ass out.
This
is my space. What are you doing here?
It's easier said than done, but I would say even if you're experiencing something like that in the woods that you can't explain and you think there might be these creatures around, it'd be a good idea to try to keep your emotions under control in the sense that you don't want to get scared. Think about what an aggressive dog does to a person when they sense that the person's scared.
Exactly.
Infrasound.
Like what do people and creatures do when they get scared? They get aggressive.
The big thing on the Todd Standing episode that you sent me, or video that you sent me, is don't run.
Yeah.
Because you're going to trigger that predator instinct.
Yeah.
It's just like how you play with a cat with a piece of string. It's just something moving really fast.
Everybody basically who gets attacked by mountain lions, they're like mountain bikers and trail runners.
Joggers.
Yep. Yeah, I just think it's one of those things, even with fear, once you start putting out that fear, everything can sense it,
Yeah.
You can sense when somebody's getting scared, and if you're getting scared, you might get aggressive. And that's, if you can control your fear, which is way easier said than done, like I said, but if you can control your fear, that might be very beneficial.
Like on that note, what do you think about like when so many accounts I've heard of like a hunter pointing their weapon because they're scared, and then the aggression goes through the roof.
Oh yeah.
That speaks to the fact that they know that that's a gun.
Oh yeah.
That they not even know that it's a gun.
I would think they know.
They would have to know by this.
They watch us shoot deer.
Yeah.
I'm sure they watch.
And each other.
And each other, yeah.
And each other, yeah.
Yeah.
So they do this to each other, man.
He's pointing one of those at me?
Yeah.
I'm going to fuck this guy up.
You think about somebody equated it to the little green man equation. Somebody basically said, if there was little green alien species here on Earth, that had just kind of came out of nowhere, and they've got these ray guns, say, and we don't know exactly what they are.
But they pointed at us. We would know what was up.
Yeah, we'd see what they're doing, and like we'd see this thing can destroy like a few people at one time or whatever, and it's kind of the same thing for them. Maybe they're equating it's like those things that travel around and they're weird things on wheels with their boomsticks, and their boomsticks magically kill deer. It's like I don't know exactly what that equation was, but it was very similar.
Yeah.
Shop smart. Shop S-smart.
So like that makes me like you put up a question in my brain because they obviously watch us hunt.
Oh yeah,
they obviously watch us hunt.
If we're in their area doing whatever, they're observing.
So what do you think their hunting techniques would be?
I would assume it's ambush.
The reason this popped into my mind was the siege of Hunabi. The guy, one of the brothers, actually explains that he's watched them hunt, and wood knocking is actually part of their hunting.
Interesting.
Yeah, basically, it's like I'm up here, you down there. I'm up here, you down. Because basically, you
could funnel deer into a direction like doing that.
That's basically his hypothesis. Is like they hunt they're a pack hunter, and basically what they would do is in the specific area in Hunabi. I might be saying it wrong. It's spelled Honobia. Hunabi?
Sounds good enough to me.
But basically, he observed them like knocking up here. Then there would be responding knocking down here, and then you would hear a fucking deer fucking come rushing through the bush, and then hear the fucking attack. You hear this deer fucking crying out, and he actually talked about watching them pick up a deer like under its left arm, and then taking its head and just breaking its neck. Just
with one hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard an account of that on a recent Sasquatch Chronicles
Yeah,
episode.
on a highway. It was on a highway.
Was it on a highway?
I know
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was a very recent episode.
Like I said, it's your fault I'm obsessed with this.
Yeah. I'm happy to get you obsessed with it. It's such an awesome subject. It really is.
It definitely is, man. The big thing that I wanted to get into next was like language and vocalizations and what was the Moorhead that we were just checking out?
The Samurai Chatter.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna play a real quick clip and then we'll just kind of dive into Sasquatch language. You ready? So I definitely hear some structure. That's what's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's what Ron Moorhead, the guy who produced that tape, the Sierra Sounds.
That's what that was from. Just so you guys know.
Yeah, it was from the Sierra Sounds, and that Scott Nelson was a Navy linguistics analyst, and Ron Moorhead asked him to analyze this and see if there's any language structure within this there's a very long series of recordings, and that's just a small bit of it.
Yeah, it was like 4 hours or something like that.
Yeah, but Scott Nelson
they actually put him out on record.
Yeah, and Scott Nelson said, definitely there's language structure there, and it sounds like a very old, very dead Asiatic language.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine it would change like region to region too, just like humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Those I think are very compelling.
Do you think the different types would have different languages?
I would assume so.
Yeah. So we didn't really get into types.
Yeah,
we cut that off.
Yeah, we didn't.
So we have like your classic like Patty, which is like Wisconsin, not Wisconsin. I don't know.
It's like
Washington,
Pacific Northwest. Yeah,
yeah. And then like down in like the southern area towards Florida, they have like the skunk ape, and you see like different types of like body structure.
Skunk ape seems to be shorter.
Yeah,
generally speaking, 6 to 7 feet as opposed to 7 to 10.
Yeah, and then like the aggression. Like I noticed that the aggression definitely changes. I don't know anything about the other two types.
I don't know a whole lot about them either.
Oh, Dogman. Dogman's one of them.
Well, yeah. Well, and there's one supposed Bigfoot type that has kind of almost like a snout, and some people might say that
it's the Dogman.
Some people might say that's the Dogman.
Yeah. Well, and then
I don't know how I feel about the Dogman.
Dogman is a thing that's really interesting because it's like it's more of like what you would call a skinwalker than anything. But people lump it into it. I'm sure you know a lot about skinwalkers. And that's actually really, really big to our area. Is like the Native American belief in skinwalkers, shapeshifters. Yeah. So like you hear a lot of really interesting. Like one story I heard about the Dogman is these two highway patrolmen were in their car and driving, and this Dogman, to give the listeners an idea, it's basically a fucking werewolf. Yeah, that's basically what it is.
Essentially, yep.
So it's this actually keeping pace with their car, and then fucking darts in front of their car and then off into the field. So it kept pace at like fucking 70 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I've heard some of the Dogman stories, and I don't know. Some of them are very interesting. They're definitely entertaining. I don't know how I feel about them though.
Well, it seems to be, far be it from us to dismiss a Dogman story,
right?
When we're talking about Bigfoot,
exactly.
Right. Exactly. Like far be it from us, dude. Like, it'd be like it'd be like us doing this show and then somebody telling us the Loch Ness monster was fake. Okay, come on. So you gotta like the Dogman is really in particular interesting to me because it's like kind of centralized to our area.
Yep.
And then you hear these really weird things about them like following people home and standing outside their houses, and like people hear like Indian drums and shit.
Creepy stories. They're really creepy stories. Yeah. The Beast of Bray Road's probably the most famous of the Dogman stories.
Good call. Yeah. You're familiar with that at all?
That one, no, actually.
It's basically like the one thing I equate it to is You remember the story of the lady in the white dress?
Yes.
That's kind of what I kind of correlate those stories. Because can you recall like one of the real big encounters from the Beast Bear Road?
You know, I can offhand.
It seems like to be the thing that they drive by all the time.
It's another one of those stories that I heard once, and I thought it was really interesting, and I haven't listened to anything about it since, and I can't really recall any of it, to be honest, but I know it's probably the most famous series of sightings of dogmen.
Yeah.
And it seemed like the whole town, if I remember right, the whole town in whatever this area was, maybe Wisconsin, was seeing this thing, or Minnesota.
Okay.
It was somewhere up there in the central Midwest, or the northern Midwest, I should say.
Okay. Because I've heard a lot of stories of like different types of, like before we were talking about with Sasquatch, was like the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're super aggressive. Sometimes they're nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really weird with these type of. I'm just going to use the word cryptids.
Yeah.
It's really weird because like all around the world, there's accounts of similar creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So like one of the things I went out of my way to write down was some really obscure names for Sasquatch, quote unquote, or its cousins, all around the world. So of course we have Sasquatch, and then I wrote down Yeti as well, which that's from the Himalayas. You know, you have the really crazy story of those hikers. They were in the snow in Russia.
Oh yeah, I've heard about
from
this
Russia.
one, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard that story?
Are you talking about the ones where they kind of all died in very mysterious circumstances?
And they all weren't wearing clothes, and like one lady looked like she was in a car crash. And
I'm very familiar with that story. It's the Dyatlov Pass incident.
Is that how it's said? Give the listeners a little rundown.
Dyatlov Pass, Dyatlov Pass incident in Russia. This was in the 40s or the 50s? I think it was in the 50s.
Yeah.
Because it was it was after World War II, and the Soviet Union was at its height of power, essentially at that point in time. And they were cross country skiers that went on.
Is that what they were?
Yeah,
okay.
Really long expedition. I think it was in February. Yeah, in Siberia. Or no, it wasn't in Siberia. It was the Ural Mountains.
Mm-hmm. Of all the times to go too, right?
Exactly. And essentially, they camped at a spot. And one of them got really sick before this second leg of the expedition.
And has stayed behind.
He's the only one that lived
because he stayed behind.
He had to. He was sick, and weeks and weeks and weeks passed. These people didn't come back, and eventually they were found near the last place that they camped, and all of them had cut their way out of their tents,
which is crazy.
They cut their way out of their tents. Left their tents essentially in their socks and their underwear, and were found they were all found to be killed in various or like very mysterious circumstances.
Extreme, like bones broken in a way that was like similar to a car crash.
Exactly. And there was other weird things, like tongues missing from some of them, eyeballs missing from others. A lot of people would attribute that to scavenger birds, which makes sense. The most common explanation to what happened there is that they heard an avalanche and they were terrified and they ran. The question is what killed them.
Yeah, you don't get your tongue like
they weren't buried in snow.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the big key. And plus, I mean, if they were found under the snow, that would completely explain the death and the type of injury.
Exactly.
But if they're found on top of the snow,
and it's possible that it is possible that all of them, sometimes in an avalanche you get pushed towards the top.
That's
and
true.
You're kind of riding the wave, so to speak. But I think there was 9 of them, and for all 9 of them to be on top of that riding the wave, the odds are quite astronomical, I believe. Yeah.
Well, there was even evidence of some of them trying to start a fire.
A lot of people would attribute that incident to them being killed by a family of Bigfoot. Some people that were in a town that was on the other side of the mountain range or the other side of the big ridge line.
Like the common name, the local name for that place is like "Don't go there" or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that, but I know the people that were in the town not too far away on the other side of the mountain range said over that particular area they were seeing strange lights in the sky all night.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe there was some sort of weird Russian government experiment that accidentally killed them all.
Yeah.
And the Russian government never owned up to it, which would make a lot of sense given the time period. who knows? Who knows what happened to those poor people?
I saw one theory to basically the shape of the canyon was indicative to be able to create small tornadoes, and they had like an extreme weather incident.
Could be.
That's like one thing that I saw, but who knows?
The circumstances they died under are so mysterious, and I mean, we're 70 years into the future at this point,
and we still don't know.
Nobody's been able to figure this out, and it was a pretty well documented case. It was well documented by a corrupt government, though. Yeah. So there is that.
Well, then, like, I want to get into, like, in Australia, it's called the Yahweh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an Aborigine word for the Bushman, the wild man. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, along their northeastern coast is where the Yahweh is supposedly found.
And then one of my personal favorites is the Wendigo, and that's a Native American spirit, more or less.
Yeah, well, it's like it borders like the upper northwest in Canada.
It has a lot to do with cannibalism too, which is pretty crazy. Like,
that one
interesting.
That one I find to actually be a very interesting one because that one has so many not normal characteristics. Yeah, cannibalism being one of the big ones.
I read a story. About this native. I forget the tribe. But basically, he, long story short, he killed and cannibalized his wife two children, and he basically expressed that the spirit of the Wendigo is what made him do it.
Yeah,
and that's more or less how you become a Wendigo is eating human flesh.
Yeah.
Sounds almost like the Christianity equivalent to demonic possession.
Yes,
right?
Yes. We just did an episode on that, which was a lot of fun. Yeah,
nice.
That's why I think the Wendigo specifically is so fascinating because that one is really put almost in a class of its own. It's really more associated with almost an evil spirit rather than
Wolverine fought a Wendigo.
Yeah. So did the Hulk. But it's one of those things that kind of ties in with more of the spiritual aspect rather than a race in and of itself.
Yeah.
But I still think it's actually a pretty interesting
Wendigo is a really cool, like, and the whole thing about the Wendigo is it's supposed to be like indestructible and just like it's got this really weird Native American take on like this thing is so sacred. But I'm sure that the Native American take on Sasquatch would probably be the same thing. Like these are our brothers, and don't. Well, it's like when
depending on the tribe you talk to.
That's a big thing.
What I was gonna get into is the Grassman and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I mean, like
the Ohio Grassman.
Yeah, the Ohio Grassman. Dude, thank you.
Yeah,
and I forget the tribe in that area, but they told stories to their children. Don't go out at night. The Grassman will get you. And like that's. What do you know about the Grassman?
I'm not too familiar with that. A lot of the stuff that I've looked into.
I literally have that written right here. The Ohio Grassman.
Most of the stuff that I've looked into is basically the western half of the United States, like the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada and the Pacific Northwest.
Well, like I know, like up in Canada, they definitely not. Oh yeah, Canada. The First Nation people up there, like they have a lot of tradition around the wild man, the Sasquatch. I forget what their word. But like they actually will not go into certain parts of the woods because they're like that's for them.
Yep.
That's for them. And and then they talk about like leaving clams on the shore and shit like that. It's like, okay, I'm gonna go harvest clams. This much is for the Sasquatch. This much is for me. So they don't come and like fuck with my shit. It's a lot of really interesting stuff, dude.
It's really interesting. You look at many Native American tribes, within their depictions of different animals. You've got, the bear, the mountain lion, the deer, and right next to them is the Sasquatch. Yeah,
exactly, just like
separated from their mythological beliefs because they kind of, most tribes tend to separate that. It's not like the Sasquatch was on the majority of totem poles,
right? But it has been on.
And I'm being very generalized. No offense to any Native Americans. I know each tribe is very different, but it's very interesting when you really look into the Native American accounts of these things. To them, it was not even a question of if it exists.
It was just that it is.
Yeah.
And I forget what tribe it was, but the exact translation of their word is Big Brother.
Oh wow, that's cool.
I forget what tribe.
Really cool.
I honestly, like, I just been doing so much reading about it the last couple of days that
it's hard to remember all of it. It definitely is, because especially when you look into the Native American side of it, there's so many different tribes and so many different accounts, and a lot of people tend to think that the Bigfoot phenomenon started with the Patterson-Gimlin film,
but it did not.
Definitely did not.
It did not.
It definitely did not. Yeah, that you can go back hundreds of years and get accounts from tons of different people. The Vikings
all over the world. All over the world.
The Vikings, when they explored North America, talked about the big hairy wild men that they didn't want to interact with.
Oh, shit, dude, that's badass.
And to freak out a Viking, that says a lot.
That fucker was probably pretty big.
Yeah,
and probably smelled. Oh, one of the other things I want to talk about before we bring it to a close. What do you think about the scent? Like when people like they smell that skunk smell.
Yeah,
but some other times they don't. I heard a theory that basically it's like a gland that they have. That it's like when they're excited.
Could be.
Like, well, because actually today I listened to an encounter where I hate to even say this, but he had that smell, and the creature itself was like super excited and had an erection.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hey?
Like I'm not going to go down that path, but what I think it like is
you
like.
Went there. I said you went there.
But do you think excitement
could be
is what puts off that smell for them?
It's an enchanting musk.
It would definitely be a musk.
I think it could be a number of things.
I can't believe I brought up a fucking Bigfoot boner, dude. Oh my god. Anyway,
it could be an intimidation tactic as far as
apes do that.
You know, they know they smell and they know when they're going to be upwind of you. So if you're going to smell them, it's most likely going to be intentional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I heard the theory of it's like a gland. That like because there's so many encounters to where there was no smell, and then other encounters where the people talk about like walking into a wall of smell.
Infrasound.
Infrasound.
That's a good. I like that.
So you got any final thoughts, brother?
I just would like to say thank you for having me, man.
Dude, thank you. Dude, can't even tell you how excited I was to do this episode.
Dude, this has been pretty fun. I gotta say.
Yeah, well,
maybe we can do a part 2 sometime.
Yeah, well, we could start doing some Sasquatch episodes on a regular basis.
That'd be pretty sweet. I'd be down for that.
Thank you for being with us again, Tony.
Oh, thank you for letting me jump in.
Yeah. So all I have to say is nerdy bones, and we're out.